As Armenia's new parliamentarians take their seats, I'm joined now by CivilNet host and analyst Eric Hacopian to break down some of the new appointments and the other developing stories right now in Armenia. Eric, thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So Pashinyan has appointed much of his new cabinet. There were some appointments which were big news in Armenia. The deputy prime minister will be Suren Papikyan, as well as Eric Hacopian, who was already in that position. Papikyan will replace Tigran Avinyan. What do you think about this appointment?
Well, Papikyan he actually has a good reputation because he was in charge primarily of rebuilding or building roads in Armenia and infrastructure, and he's actually quite accomplished for the last 2 years. I think, they built more roads over the last 2 years, and actually proper roads, well-built ones, than they have over the last 15 or 20 years. So he sort of got a reputation as someone who is a taskmaster and was on top of things and actually moved things in a governmental structure that is generally not very effective or hard to move. So I'm not sure what that means in his current position, but it's always good when you have underlings that are promoted actually after accomplishing positive things or being able to move the ball into bureaucracy and actually getting things done in a way and in a manner that is helpful to ordinary people and the general economy in this case.
And there was quite a positive reaction to the new Minister of High-Tech Industry, Vahagan Khachaturian, who will be replacing Haik Chobanyan. What was your reaction to this appointment?
Well, I think I don't know him personally. Haik Chobanyan, I've talked to once or twice. He was he was probably the best cabinet member we had previously. And there's this new one who I do not know is getting very high marks. So these are generally positive, positive appointments because they're getting, good reviews from across the political, landscape. I just hope that, Haik Chobanyan, who is one of the most effective people we have in our government, will get another high position, hopefully something even higher than he had before, because the number of sort of A-level qualified people on running departments in Armenia are rather limited. So some of these people, you want to mint and copy them. He's one of them, and I'm hoping that they find another high position that he can be useful to the country in a short time period.
And Lilit Markuns, who was previously the parliamentary head of the ruling My Step faction, is appointed now. The new ambassador to the United States. What do you think should be her priorities in her new role?
Well, I think when you're looking at, it's her new role is essentially formulating or actually, implementing the country's foreign policy towards the United States to the extent that we have one, given the fact that the foreign ministry and foreign policy generally is in chaos. But if you're going to Washington, for short order, you really want to be focused on three things. The first one is to get the United States engaged into the OSCE process and put the United States back into their peace process, which is something that the Azeris want to bury and do away with. The more emphasis from the U.S. side about the legitimacy of the OSCE process and settling the Artsakh issue once and for all is a positive. So that should be on top of the list. Secondly is to kill U.S. military aid to Azerbaijan, which is entirely unneeded and ridiculous, given the fact that you're dealing with a criminal state that trafficked in terrorists and partake in all kinds of war crimes. It's an affront that the United States is actually having any military aid to a country like that. And third is to essentially marry Aliyev to Erdogan in as many ways as possible. Because Erdogan is right now probably the third most disliked world leader in Washington after Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And to the extent that you tie Azerbaijan to Turkey, and in this case you tie Aliyev to Erdogan, that should be something that we need to be driving home and making the case and essentially having them, if they're going to have this two people, two nations, one people type of policy, it is our job to make them pay a price for it in places where Erdogan is especially unpopular.
And President Macron of France has announced that France will ship 200,000 doses of the coronavirus vaccine to Armenia. The French ambassador, Jonathan Lecotte, has also made statements about military cooperation between France and Armenia, but did state that both countries are not part of the same military alliances. We're hearing a lot of overtures from Paris, much more compared to a lot of other Western countries. What do you think about this rhetoric coming out of Paris?
Well, I think first you got to step back and look at the background of this. I think there's two issues here. One is there actually is it's well known there's a personal connection between Macron and the current Prime Minister Pashinyan. There's obviously a warm personal relationship. It's probably the only one that Pashinyan has with any primary or major world leader. So, and you saw this during the election, and the fact that, during the election, usually you don't get foreign visits, and, he got the royal treatment at the Élysée Palace in Paris. So obviously, there's a personal relationship there. Secondly, Macron is himself running for re-election next year. And the Armenian diaspora in France is sort of this, is part of the swing column of voters. Armenian voters in France traditionally tend to be on the left. Now they're moving right. And I think anything that he does with Armenia also has internal political reasonings in France because of his own purposes, because next year he's likely to be in a very close re-election campaign. As far as what the ambassador had to say about the military relationship, yeah, he's absolutely right. I mean, they've sort of hinted at this before. Macron talked about helping Armenia deal with Aliyev's illegal border invasions of Armenia. But given the fact that, NATO, France is essentially a NATO country, and Armenia's political and military alliances are with Russia, that's a rather complicated and a very touchy subject. I don't know what much will come of it. But I think outside of military relationship, I think the political relationship and the political support, especially the fact that France is part of OSCE, I think is a critical one in Armenia and can be quite helpful. So whenever you hear statements like that, they're positive. But with politicians in general, you just have to understand what their motivations are and where they're coming from.
And protests have erupted once again in multiple Iranian cities. Iran is in a dire state economically, and Armenia is a friendly neighbor to Iran. I'm wondering how you think Armenia should approach Iran in the state of affairs that it is in currently.
Well, I think there's multiple things here. There's very little that Armenians in general can do about the internal political situation in Iran, or neither do we want to. The internal political situation of the crisis in Iran is driven by essentially the inept handling of the economy by the government there, plus these absurd international sanctions, which have no rhyme or reason. And third, and this is what's key for us to understand, a good part of this protest right now are actually driven by climate change-driven factors, because it's about water shortages affecting the economy. It's not simply your daily issue, especially the demonstrations that they had in southern Iran and the oil-producing regions. And what you're really seeing is the first glimpse of the politics of the next 20 years, in which so much of the politics in our region is not going to be driven by what we're used to, but it's going to be driven by climate change and decarbonization. And what we're seeing in Iran is just the first glimpse of what is to come as drastic climate change. And you can see it sort of in the fires in Turkey, that's become a big political issue. That are going to be driving policy. So this is sort of a glimpse into the future. I think as far as Armenia's relationship with Iran, I think it's far more important for us to look at this universally, because countries, regimes and governments come and go. But I think it's key for us to develop all kinds of relationships with both political, cultural, whatever fronts that there are, that we can build people-to-people relationships with Iran. Is something that is useful in the short run, especially business ones, and useful in the long run. Because what's important for us is to have a relationship with the country and the nation, because regimes, as we know, all come and go. And then even the current Iranian system is not going to last forever. That our approach should be much more wide and universal, rather than looking for any specific policy, because our ability to impact anything there is negligible.
And finally, Eric, some diasporans are even asking me sometimes about the situation in Armenia, and many seem to be under the influence that Armenia is not safe at the moment. I've even spoken to some people who are hesitant to travel to Armenia because of this. So what would your message to these people be?
Grow up. I mean, you can't make your impressions based on, what you see on social media or half a dozen different things. Armenia has many problems. Obviously, we have problems in some of our borders of aggression by our enemies. But Armenia is a very safe place in the 99th percentile. And the country needs you to show up, to visit, to be engaged. And there's nothing to be gained by foolish fears that are not based on facts. Obviously, the country has a lot of problems, but those problems are solvable, and people need to show up, support people there, and be engaged in what the country needs to do to get back on its feet and head in the right direction. So, I get the same feedback. I think there's true realities, the reality of Armenia and the perceptions of what's out there. And the perceptions, frankly, in many places, especially in the United States, are far worse than the reality. That's not saying there's not 1,000 problems and 1,000 things to worry about, but that should not, we should base our actions on facts. We should base our actions on reality rather than unreasoned fear.
Well, Eric, thank you as always.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.